Let's look at Proverbs chapter 1, where I read at the beginning. Now, this series that I'm just going to be talking about for a few weeks might actually strike you as being a bit of a contradiction to some of the things I've said recently. I've talked a little about how I didn't desire for myself, and certainly not for us as a church, that we just become full of knowledge. We become just walking down the street, the icons of intelligence. That isn't, I don't think, God's desire for anybody, but certainly nothing that I think we should hope for. It builds up our ego, it makes us feel good, just like good educations can add initials to the end of your name. It doesn't necessarily do anything for you if you don't do anything with the knowledge. And so my hope is that actually it won't be a contradiction. It will be an application. It'll be something that as we look at this, we can actually see how knowledge put into practice becomes something of really great value. Imagine it this way, and I kind of give this as an introduction, but guys will certainly understand how easy it can be to collect tools. And depending on the job that you have to do or the DIY job you might get involved in, it seems like there are always specialty tools that you can get which make it easier than using just a hammer and a pair of pliers and, an open-ended spanner kind of thing. If you have a few tools in the box, you can pretty much do everything. If you have a specialty tool, I remember back when I used to do car mechanics before computers, and I actually took classes in autos, and of course we had distributors. Do you remember? Some of these terms are even antiquated now, you don't talk about them, but we had a distributor, and they had this tool, which we called in America a distributor wrench. And what it was this, it had a handle that went across this way, and then it went down like this, and then it went back across like this, and then it had its little, it had an open-ended kind of wrench at the top, and this was to fit down around the distributor and onto that so that you could get to it, because some of these things are really hard to get to in a car, and they created this tool specifically for that purpose. Now if you didn't have one, and you'd have to get some young child with a very thin arm who could reach down and hopefully get this loose, but if you had the right tool, it just made it nice. And of course, you get to the point where if you need one, you have to buy it, and then you put it in your toolbox. And through the years, I have accumulated tools. I don't know, I see a few smiles. It's easy after a while to accumulate quite a lot of tools. And of course, I needed then at one point a new toolbox to be able to store all of my new tools in. And then, of course, I needed an additional toolbox or a bigger toolbox. And I think now, if I confess before you, I think I have 4, toolboxes full of all of these. And of course, coming to the flat, it was really interesting because I thought I'm going to need a toolbox for the flat, but I don't want to take all my tools. So I thought I'll just get one and put a few of the important ones in it that I think I might need. And it's interesting how few I got away with, in the end. But I think we have that same danger, I'll call it, in life to acquire a tremendous amount of knowledge that we never use. It just is there. It's something we might know about, but we don't do anything with it. And some of you are probably thinking, yeah, John, quite like your Maserati series, you gave us a whole lot of knowledge about stuff I'm never going to be able to use. Of course, the idea is, the thought, the hope is that maybe some of the things that you acquire knowledge-wise, the Lord will desire to use at some place. And you'll say, oh, hang on a minute, have you ever had somebody come and want to borrow something, and you say, oh, you know what? I do have that, actually. And then this knowledge of having picked it up someplace or someone giving it to you, and you go, and sure enough, you pull out the exact thing they need, and you think, oh, there you go. That's my excuse for hoarding, is because I've, needed it at some stage. It's been there. I think we can certainly get to a point to where we have too much. But the important thing, I think, is being able to look across at the knowledge we've acquired and then say, how can I use this? How can I take what it is that I've learned and put this into practice? I'm way off the topic when I say it, but little things that we've learned in our lives can actually be used of the Lord. Like, for instance, maybe you have a skill, I'll just use this as an example, playing a recorder. Oh, I did that in school. Yeah, I was quite good at that, actually. I know how to play that really quite well. And you think, yeah, I probably never do that again. I don't even know where Why not? Why not be able to say, I've got this little thing. I wonder if maybe if I learned a little Christian tune, if maybe some Sunday morning I might be able to get up and, as part of our worship, just play that tune. You say, I don't know. Why not explore some of the things that you've learned how to do and see if God can't use them somehow? So I say that just as a kind of a challenge, kind of as one of those things. But when it comes to the topic today, it all has to start someplace. And I believe passionately that the whole topic of knowledge starts by the fear of the Lord. It starts with a holy respect. Holding the Lord in a place of saying, I have a respect and an awesome fear of who you are. I'll read a few commentators, a few people who've said a few things about this, just because I found these interesting, and I didn't want to claim that I'd said it. I'll give them credit. The beginning of knowledge is found in reverence and awe, the fear of the finite in the presence of the infinite, of the sinful in the presence of the holy. This was the starting point of all true knowledge. In the book of Job, it appears as poetry. In Psalms, it comes as the choral close of a temple hymn. This fear has no torment. So it's not the kind of fear that you think of, It's not a torment kind of fear. It doesn't have a torment. It's compatible with a childlike love. But this and not love is the beginning of knowledge. Through successive stages, by the discipline of life, love blends with it and makes it perfect. Think about that. You have a little child. A little child looks up to its parent, kind of like the way I look up at Nathan. As a child, you look at this enormous human being called my parent. And there is this kind of almost an intimidation, but there is a fear of the size and knowing that they know how to walk and I don't know how to walk, and they know how to talk and I don't know how to talk, and they feed themselves without dropping food on the floor, all the little things that a child might notice about a parent. And when you consider all of that and put it in context, you say it starts by saying that person knows more than I do. It's a childlike faith. Of course, then, as it says, it's a successive stage by the discipline of life, and then love blends with it and makes it perfect. So when fear is coupled with love, that's what you get with perfection. Now think about this. In your early days in life, let's say even before you became a Christian, I know for some of you that won't apply because you've been a Christian pretty much all your life. But at one stage in my life, I'll use myself as an example, there was a time when I had a fear of God. I mean, I didn't do everything right. In fact, I probably did more wrong than I did right in life. But I was always afraid because there was part of me wanting to not believe in God, because then I could get away with stuff. But if he really existed, yee, And I'll never forget the first time I actually read through the Ten Commandments in Exodus and came to the realization that they weren't suggestions. He wasn't just saying, try to do this. He was demanding it. And I knew I'd already screwed up. I'd already got it wrong. And I think, ooh, there was a fear in me. There was a terror in me. After I found out that actually he loved me, and the whole desire of the Ten Commandments was to show me I couldn't do it and I needed him, and I realized that actually this was all motivated out of love, and I received him and became a Christian, suddenly it all changed. Did my respect and awe for him change? No, he never stopped being that terrible being, But at the same time, now I know that terrible being is my dad. You know what I mean? There was suddenly a relationship that came with it. There was something about it that brought love with it. And now my respect and terror is like saying, yes, I've met this, gruesome creature with incredible capabilities in a dark alley, and I'm terrified of him until I realize actually we're on the same team. Then suddenly it all changes. Suddenly I realize it isn't me who should be afraid, it's everyone else, because he's mine. This is one of mine. And when I get that love and I start realizing that the starting place though is fear, it gives me kind of a different understanding. Another commentator said, in the preceding verses before this, Solomon shows the advantage of acting according to the dictates of knowledge. In the following verses, the ones that come after, he shows the danger of acting contrary to them. So the fear of the Lord signifies religious reverence, which every intelligent being owes to his Creator, is often used to express the whole of their religious belief. The religion, the love of God, and the love of man, the former producing all the obedience to God's will, the latter every act of benevolence to one's fellow. Put that in New Testament terms, it would come down to the fact that God is first showing who he is, and then saying, now that you know who I am, do what I want you to do by being who I would be here on earth. Put it into practice. Make it so that people see my love through you. So it is the starting place to say, I have fear. Believe it or not, those are all introductory statements. I've got just 3 points, though, that I want to share. When it comes to the fear of the Lord being the beginning, where you start, these are my words, where you start is important to where you finish. If you don't start from the right spot, you won't finish in the right place. The illustration I know breaks down because there are places that you could start that you'd end up in the right place. But what I'm trying to say is you can't learn from someone that you don't believe. Have you ever been in a classroom at school and had a teacher who was saying stuff to you and you thought, that's absolute rubbish. That's just so not right. They don't have their history right. They have their kings and queens mixed up. They have their timeline screwed up. They have their elements on the chemical table messed up. You just look at them and instantly there's a turnoff because you say, you know what? I don't trust them. I don't believe that what they're saying to me is true. When you get a doctor like that, that's really dangerous. If you have a doctor who starts telling you something and say, that's not right. Yeah, those are my symptoms, but that is not my diagnosis. That is just completely wrong. You have a breakdown when you come to a point where you don't believe the person that is trying to teach you. Another way to look at it, you can't be led by a map that you don't trust. And that's most of our sat-navs, I'm not so sure about that. Last night when I was coming back, driving down, and of course it was telling me I needed to take a route I don't normally take. And there was part of me thinking, I'm not sure. Come to find out the 338 was closed. They had to shut down. It was like, oh, thankfully I listened. But if you get to a point where you look at a map and you say, just not sure that's actually correct, especially if you know an area and you look at it and you say, I don't think that's right. Bethany took two of the girls several years ago on a hike in the Lake District. And as they were going over the mountains, and it was one of those kind of hikes where she said, drop me at X place and pick me up at Y place, several hours later, and I'll ring you from there. And it was like, okay, no problem. Went back to the campsite, and having a good time. And the hours were passing, and I was thinking, this is interesting. And of course, as the sun is beginning to set, I'm beginning to really wonder. Finally, I got a phone call, and she ended up there. And what had happened was she followed a map, which wasn't correct. It took her a direction that she shouldn't have had to go. She ended up following some other people to get around, and finally, eventually got there. And a 2-hour hike turned into a 5-hour hike, But it's one of those situations where if you look at something and you don't trust it, you're just not going to end up in the right place. I say it because if we are going to end up being the people that God wants us to be, we have to have a holy fear, respect, awe of God. And if you're here, and I'm certainly not suggesting that anybody have it, but if you're here and you don't, then you can't expect to end up where it is that God wants you to end up. If your starting point is, he was a good man, he said a few good things, maybe occasionally something he said might click, but actually God and my God and director of my life, no, it's not going to happen. You can't expect to end up where it is that he says you need to be if you don't start from the right place. Second point, the placement of your heart dictates the attitude of your motivations. I'll say it again. The placement of your heart dictates the attitude of your motivations. Humility. This is where you exalt God and you abase yourself. When you put God up where he belongs and deserves to be, and you put yourself down in a place where actually you should be. There are verses that say, I must decrease, he must increase. It's probably worded the other way around. But the idea being, if I exalt God to where he needs to be, then I will become abased, I'll become less. But actually, the accomplishment is great. When we consider the world in which we live, we're taught the exact opposite. We're taught how we need to really build our self-esteem by building ourselves up. Any of you happen to notice some of the, I know you probably do, but when they have a prize fight on, and I was reading about the welterweight who won in 40 seconds yesterday, thinking all those people who spent all that money to go see that fight in Las Vegas, and it was over in 40 seconds. Whew, wouldn't have wanted to pay that. Anyway, but when something like that happens, do you hear prize fighters get up and talk humbly? Just reading what they say about them. I'm the greatest man who ever lived and nobody can defeat. And you just listen to all that stuff. Well, the guy who happened to lose had been saying all that kind of stuff. And you just think, what does it look like when you say all those things about yourself and then lose in 40 seconds? It just all crumbles down. On the other hand, if a person gives a little bit of respect to another fighter, and if he ends up winning, listen to that. I know it's a stupid illustration, but if a guy says, actually, the man I'm fighting today is an incredibly strong, brave, undefeated, just to be in the ring with him makes me feel great. What if he wins that fight? Do you know what just happened when he does that? Everything he said about that guy, he just elevated himself above him by winning. Just see how humility strangely ends up going to your benefit. How can that be? Okay, so you say, well, I have a low self-esteem. Then build God up. Then put God up where God needs to be. If you have a low self-esteem, exalt him. Don't exalt yourself. You'll lose in 40 seconds, Exalt him. You say, yeah, but how's that help me? Because if you exalt him and then he picks you up, where does that put you? It puts you up there with the Lord. Because God will bring you up. Let him be the one who elevates you. Let him be the one who calls you from the back to the front. Let him be the one. The Bible says, let other men praise you, not the words of your own mouth. We're taught today, build yourself up. And what do we have around us everywhere in this world? We have people who are depressed. We have people who consider themselves to be completely useless and worthless. And you say, well, wait a minute. We have more books for sale on the shelves which talk about self-esteem than we've ever had in history. We should have some of the most proud, egotistical people in the world walking the streets. And we don't. We have an epidemic of people who are depressed and on medications because they're not dealing with. And I'm not suggesting that those won't still be issues, but I'm saying the place to start is with fear and awe of who God is and lifting him up. The third thing, knowledge will work itself out in your actions. What you know will determine where you go. I'm not on this rhyme thing, but that worked last week really well. What you know will determine where you go. If you look at and access the knowledge that you've acquired and put that into practice, it will lead you where God wants you to go. I want to say this another way. I keep saying things that sound really good, but they don't really get the point across. There was a time in my life where I wanted to be a minister of a church. So I plotted out the course of where I wanted to go. I want to go to Bible school. I want to go to uni. I want to go to seminary. I had all the stuff that you're supposed to do to get where it was that I wanted to go. And somewhere along the line, I got distracted. Not dangerously, but I ended up getting into a radio station and thinking how cool it would be to work in a radio station and applying for a job and getting a job and working at a radio station and then becoming a radio station manager. And I'm thinking, preacher, where's this going, And I sat with I really did. I got a little bit of time and I went and talked to my pastor about it. I said, listen, I'm a bit concerned. I'm having a great time. I'm not complaining. I mean, I'm working in a radio station. This is really cool, and I'm having fun. Don't feel like I've got a job. I feel like I'm just having fun. But as far as this whole preacher thing, it feels like a distraction, and my preacher gave me some wisdom. He said, no, it's not a distraction. He said, God won't ever let you acquire knowledge that he doesn't intend to somehow use. So all that stuff, look across your life, look at all the things that you've done, all the knowledge you've acquired, and you say, I don't understand how this works. Like when I took French class, I took 4 years of French, and then God sent me to Texas, where I was on the border with Mexico. I thought, why didn't I take Spanish? If I take 4 years of French, but I didn't realize that God was just about ready to send me up to the Canadian border, where I would have an office close to Montreal, where they spoke French. I thought, oh, he did have a purpose in that. He did want me to learn how to do that for a reason. He wasn't wasting my time. Nothing that comes into your life will be a waste of time. Instead, it's up to us to find out how he wants to use that. What you know will determine where you go. Little funny illustration that when I was a kid, I used to watch a cartoon at lunchtime in Chicago on television called Bozo's Circus. Have you ever heard of Bozo? Does that mean? Okay, yeah. Sounds, you've heard the term, he's a bozo. That's where it comes from, this clown. And there was this little sketch that they did in the middle of this program once. And I've used this 1,000 times as an illustration because it fascinated me. But you get this little clown, and he's over here and he's looking for something. And then you get another clown come up and say, can I help? Yeah, I lost a pin, just a little pin. And of course, it's just floor like this. And so he says, so you get this other clown, and he's down on the ground. And another one comes along, can I help? He says, yeah, I lost this little pin. And he says, great. So he's down there, and they're all three of these looking. Fourth one comes along, and he says, can I help? He says, yeah, I'm looking for a pin. He asks a question. He says, where'd you lose it? He said, I lost it over there. And he says, why are we looking over here? And he said, because there's more light over here. I can't see anything over there. What? But the idea of the whole thing is sometimes in our lives, we start trying to teach stuff we don't know. When God says, actually, this is what I've taught you. Use what I've taught you. Use the things that have come into your life. And you say, yeah, but that's difficult because playing a recorder just doesn't work. We don't have recorders in church. We have guitars and drums and stuff. And God says, it doesn't make any difference. Just use what I have given you. There will be a place for what you know somehow. There was a mechanic that I used to go to church with, and he used to ask that question. He used to say, how is being a car mechanic in a church, what is God going to use me for? And the preacher said, well, there's a lot of people who need some repairs in the church. Why don't you just stand up one Sunday morning and say, does anybody need your car looked at? And he said, after he did that one time, he said he's never been bored ever again. It's just people. And he said, well, yeah, but that was his ministry, and he believed that God had called him to do and use what it was he did. I don't know how it applies to you. I wouldn't begin to sit here and give you specifics. But I do know the starting place of being able to take your knowledge and using it is being able to know who God is. Know that God never sends you on a path that he doesn't intend for it to mean something in your life. And it's up to us to discover what that is. It's up to us to take that knowledge and apply it. And that's where we'll learn to serve the Lord in the way he wants us to serve. Exalt him. Humble yourself. Let's pray.